don't mind, you know. So I guess that's my biggest thing. I've had issues with particularly Texas Children's Hospital that have brought up ethics committee meetings multiple times and, you know, been resolved. And I feel like a big part of it is, you know, having expectations of respect for you as a part of the caregiving team and respect for the doctor too as part of caregiving. So.
Well,
we went to high school together, but we didn't know this until like last year. But we've been advocating together for a while.
Yeah, and we also have a very kind of similar situation. My daughter had a severe malignant Tourette syndrome. She was in and out of the hospital, and you know, Tourette syndrome, people think of on TV is we just blurt out stuff, and that can be the case, but it's more likely to Parkinson's disease, developmental disease instead of a degenerative form of the symptoms are the same. And we were at Texas Children's, and my daughter spent a lot of time there in and out when she was younger. And one of the times we were there, I read an article published by the National Tourette Association saying that there were, you know, some good research about cannabis being, you know, helpful treatment for Tourette's, and it kind of sparked myself to, you know, start, you know, doing a little investigating on my own. And so we decided that that's what we were going to try, kind of the same thing. If you try any kind of cannabis products, you know, you can't be seen at Texas Children's anymore. And I would do the same thing. I asked for the medical records, and kind of, you know, I just put it upon myself that, you know, we've got to change these kind of policies because they're not helping the patients. And you know, it's a fear every day of all of a sudden, well, now these people know that we're giving our kids. And, yeah, what's considered to them, you know, all they see is the Schedule I narcotic, because that's what the law is. To us, it's a life-changing, you know, medicine. And so that's how I got into advocating patients' rights and medical cannabis.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Krista, as a consultant for family rights, what types of circumstances have you seen families go through, and how do you help them?
So I've actually seen a lot of cases regarding parents who are, you know, using medical cannabis, or they're treating their children with it. And in both cases, the most significant one as far as how to protect your family, the most dangerous one, excuse me, is when it's involving your children. If you are self-medicating yourself for anxiety, PTSD, depression with cannabis, yes, it is considered child abuse and neglect. I don't know if y'all know that, but it is definitely considered child abuse and neglect. However, it's easier to take care of, and we can go over that. But when your child is sick, and like these two individuals, nobody will help them, and you go to cannabis, whether it be illegally, through a doctor, through a CBD store, whatever, CPS does not like it. They view it as harming your child. They view it as medical neglect because you're not choosing to do the medicine route. And so to give a conversation in a short minute about how we handle that is not going to happen in a short minute. The gist of it is when you're dealing with CPS, whether it be because you're using cannabis or you're giving it to your child, and frankly, any accusation you're dealing with CPS, it's a game of Russian roulette. And I happen to be really good at that game, but make no mistake, there is a bullet in the gun, and you do not need to do a CPS investigation at all without an attorney. When I was an advocate, I had other advocates, and I was able to help families without an attorney, and the other advocates did as well. We were so successful that in October of 2021, the department put policies in place to try to get us to go away. Now, there's loopholes to everything, so we're not going anywhere. However, if you try to do this with somebody that knows what they're doing, but is not an attorney, you're going to have an extra fight. Because like I said, we were so successful in helping families, they put these policies into place. If you have an attorney tells you, let them in. You don't have anything to hide. Yes, you do. And second, and if an attorney tells you to say that, you can comply for free. You do not need to pay $5,000 for a retainer to comply. So if you have an attorney that tells you that, it's not the attorney for you. Also, in regards to how we take care of families is whether it be by myself or with an attorney goes to school to learn the law, they go to school to learn due process. And when you're dealing with CPS, all that goes out the door, which is why many attorneys don't know how to deal with them, which is where I come into play. So every case, whether it be you're doing, medical cannabis for yourself or you're giving it to your child, there's so many different variables. It would make it hard for me to tell you guys how I help each family. But the best thing I can tell you is if CPS shows up at your door for whatever reason, open the door, be very kind to them. Thank you so much for looking out for the best interests of my children or child. Now, please have your business card and I'll call you back. If they demand to see your child, then let them see your child from the inside of the threshold and continue to say, thank you so much for looking out for the best interests of my child, children. Please give me your business card and I will call you back. And do it repeatedly. And if you have to shut the door, then shut the door and then call somebody. That's somebody being somebody that knows what they're doing, not just any attorney. And when this is over, I can help you guys know which attorneys know how to handle CPS, and specifically attorneys that know how to handle cannabis-related concerns. But main thing, do not communicate with them unless you have help.
So with illicit parent use, what kind of rights are you guys seeing being taken away and what types of punishments here in Texas? What have all three of you experienced?
In regards to CPS, if you have a parent who's doing recreational or illicit drug use, specifically cannabis, there was already a policy in place prior to this past session that basically said the use of drugs, the admission of drug use or a positive drug test does not constitute child abuse. It's the effect of the child. However, in House Bill 567, which was authored by Representative Frank and it passed this last session, it actually specified marijuana. The use of marijuana, the admission of marijuana, and the positive drug test of marijuana does not constitute child abuse. It's the effect of the child. So while we think we are giving a right and put it in statute that, hey, you have the right to do this, CPS has found a way around it. So the rights that are being taken away are when you tell a caseworker, I am doing marijuana, I am smoking cannabis, however you say it, to fall asleep at night, or I'm doing this because I have anxiety, or I'm doing it because my kids aren't home and I want to do it on a Friday night. Everything now becomes around mental illness. Do not think that you are going to gain empathy from a CPS caseworker. If you try to tell CPS, well, I have ADD, I have PTSD, whatever the mental illness is, they are going to say, oh, you have a mental illness that you're choosing not to take care of. You're putting your children in danger. So the rights that are being taken away are your HIPAA rights. Your HIPAA rights are nobody's business but your own. You're not going to gain empathy from them. Do not talk to them about your medical information. Do not talk to them about somebody like myself or an attorney. But even though we've gotten a right kind of given to us this last session, specifically with marijuana, they've already found a loophole. So in CPS world, that's what we're dealing with.
I mean, really brutal person. I mean, besides like stuff I hear through the grapevine, I mean, in Texas, people who medicate is kind of a close network. Like we've known each other for a while. I mean, I don't know everybody. I'm sure Cannabis knows everybody, but you get to know because we all see how important it is, so we become active. So, I think people just don't know much that we're not doing that. I don't know about.
Yeah. And I think
want to add one more thing with your dad. I'm so sorry.
that's okay. Yeah, and some of the things that too, and Greg, feel free to mention is like parents are losing gun rights. They're losing the child is being removed from the home. They're having employment issues after that, and so there's just so many chances and risks that you're taking when you're choosing this as an option, even though it may be the best option. So,
Well, if I could just add something real quick.
Yeah.
Like for us, it wasn't as simple as we were just giving our daughter marijuana to smoke. It was an actual tincture that came from Colorado that had THC in it. It was a high THC tincture, and just bringing it from Colorado to Texas, just possessing cannabis concentrate at the time. When we started that, there was no compassionate use program or nothing yet. So it was an automatic felony, even for, it's still a felony. So, you could be in possession of, what you think of as just medicine. And like I said, to the law enforcement, to Texas Children's, to everyone else involved, it's a Schedule I narcotic and it's an automatic felony. So you have the same rights taken away as any other felon. And, it can be pretty scary when you think about, not only losing your kids, but your kid already has a medical condition, a severe medical condition that you're willing to break the law. And you think of, well, then my kid's gonna be without me, without the medicine. And, sometimes even, the rights that you might lose at the jail time, it's like some of the least of your worries.
Well, so
But it's still an issue and something that, you have to take in consideration. And it's always best to have someone that, like she was saying, that you can call. Don't try to do it by yourself because you don't know what you're doing. You need someone some of us were put in the position that we just had to. But any advice I could give, make sure that you have someone, maybe ahead of time, that before CPS comes in, know who you're going to call.
absolutely. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, you had mentioned the word punishment. What kind of punishments are you seeing? And I had skipped a portion of my answer. When we're talking about marijuana use of any kind, whether it be you or your child, CPS, when they come in, if they have an accusation of drug use, unless y'all have been under CPS investigation, y'all don't know this, but you are actually under investigation for every definition of child abuse and neglect. There is a main allegation, but every single family in Texas that goes under a CPS investigation is under a global investigation. Your children will be investigated for sexual abuse, physical abuse, drug addiction, alcohol abuse, hoarding, you name it. If it's in the definition or in the child abuse definition, they're going to be interrogated. I'm using that word on purpose. Your children will be interrogated. You guys will be interrogated. And if you let CPS in your home, let's pretend your spouse is a stay-at-home parent, and there's clothes everywhere, and the dog just had an accident, and there's kids screaming, one's in a diaper, just pooped their pants. You're now under investigation for whatever chaos they're just witnessing. It's actually just part of life. So even though I might have an answer for you for today for the marijuana stuff, y'all need to be aware that you're actually under investigation for every single accusation of child abuse and neglect. And none of us are free from the vague definitions of child abuse and neglect. Nobody in here is. And their eyes, when they walk into your house, they are going to find something wrong. So just reiterate, don't do it alone.
Thank you. So due to the high licensing fees for our current dispensaries, this directly affects the cost of medications currently provided. So how is this affecting patients and their ability to join the program? And then parents who continue purchasing and using the illicit market? I mean, what are your feedback, or what's your feedback on that?
So for us, because of the cost, right now it's a little less expensive than it used to be. We currently pay about $255 a month for Zach's cannabis oil, but that's in addition to some other pharmaceuticals that are more expensive than that, but whatever. But we've known people who have maxed out, like with the teacup medications, and they were maxing out at like $1,600 or $1,800 a month. And so, it's not feasible for a lot of people. I feel like, the $255 a month isn't feasible for a lot of people. We're just lucky to be able to afford doing that. So there was a second part though to your question.
Oh, as parents having to go back and use the illicit market versus.
Yeah. So the illicit market. So it's not just the illicit market; it's illicit CBD. So for me, I'm also studying medical cannabis science and therapeutics, and it doesn't take that program to have this knowledge. It just takes knowing what you're looking at on the internet. But there's a lot of CBD products that aren't safe. 50% of them tested in a lot of different clinical studies found that there's contaminants. They don't have what's in them. So the thing is, being, with your parents' rights and whatever you're going to go look at doing for your children, you need to make sure that you're doing the best. And sometimes, you just do the best with what you have, which is often illicit market. I was just buying bud. I didn't know how we got to Texas, the guy tells him Colorado.
Right.
He's got a friend that went from Colorado. But I don't know. So, and then I don't know, and even if he's getting it from Colorado, I don't know if it has, you know, pesticides on there, holds, things like that. So, but those are the, you know, those are the benefits and risks you weigh when you're in a situation. So, you know, my advice would be like to just be really careful if you're using any kind of product for yourself. You know, make sure that you've got certificates of analysis on all of them, and make sure that there's, I would make sure that there's more than one certificate of analysis on independent, separate labs, you know, the reason I'm talking about this is because that CBD is a lot less expensive, and a lot of people will turn to the CBD, but, and, you know, maybe they'll be okay with like, okay, I've got this moderate result, but really if you get a little bit of guidance, I mean, and we need like more education in order to get more guidance, but, you know, turn to the internet and do your research. I guess my advice here is to be an educated consumer. Whether you're looking for a lawyer or a doctor or a CBD product, a THC product, whatever it is, you know, give yourself as much education as you have access to. So, because that responsibility, right?
Well, if I can add to that, as far as the expense between the licensing and everything here in Texas, like Piper said, it's recently gone down after this year. You know, more patients, there's many more patients, thousands more than there were, you know, in 2019, which there was hardly any. There was maybe like 1,000.
Barely.
And then and it was really high.
But they said that's 1,500 ever. That doesn't
Right.
mean people to stop doing that, you know.
Right, but so my point is, like a 1-to-1 tincture at Goodwin is about $65 to $80, and at Livewell in Pueblo, North Colorado, basically the same thing. It's like $18. So I mean, I know that because that's. Is it? Yeah. So you know, our system, it's getting better. It's taking tiny steps, and it just seems like forever that we've been working on this, trying to get it to where it needs to be. But in other states, you know, it is a big difference. You know, it's you know, in cost, because like for us, it's just a fact that, you know, my daughter has to have the medicine every day. And so you have to look at, you know, where you're going to get the money, how much you're going to be able to spend, and, you know, the price, like I said, it's gone down, you know, but it was to where, you know, for a while, even like those bottles, the high CBD, and before when the THC was only at 5%, even those bottles were, you know, like almost like $300.
So that actually brings up an interesting topic. So if some of you recall last session or before last session, the Novacek family, NFL player, their son had traumatic brain injury. And I'll never forget, before this session, his story came out how his wife had to show, I think it was the milligram or allowable dose was 0.5% THC. And so in order to get the amount of dosage that he needed, they showed us in a cup how much oil he was having to take a day. And not to mention the cost over the month was almost, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was almost $2,800 a month just to take that much oil every day just to help him. And so patients like that, it makes sense to go back to an illicit market.
Right.
But, you know, we obviously want to do the right thing, and we want to take care of our children the right way and do it through a legal market. It's just, so it's nice to see the change.
That's where we were at the 2019 session when her condition, you know, they didn't get in. And I said, you know, that's kind of almost a blessing in disguise, because the price at the time, it was still cheaper for us to go to Colorado for a week and buy a year's supply of medicine and come home, you know, and have a family vacation out there, than it would be to buy the medicine that was at the time still subpar, that you would have to, you know, use so much of it to get the same effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a thing that, you know, it's not just the legality of it, you know, the feasibility of it too. where you get, where you get your medicine from. And
Yeah.
like you say, it's medicine. It's not just something that,
Yeah, you need it reliable.
and you need it to be
So-
reliable.
so
You
one-
need it to work the same every
Yeah.
time.
Which is one of the reasons when I was doing the THCA, making it for it was working pretty well, but we supplemented with the teacup. We started the teacup and supplemented teacup because it's more consistent. So like if I'm buying in the illicit market, I can't always get the same chemogar that I'm after. So it's like, in order to reduce the amount of THCA and giving him the CBD. And so, yeah, it's worth the expense.
I love when that happens. Well, let me ask y'all another question. So there was actually a story that came out at the end of January from a mother of a 9-year-old girl in Oklahoma, which had a medical card to use it for her seizures. CPS came and took her daughter away with a medical card in a legal medical state. Thankfully, it was only 3 days. She was able to return. But the problem with this story is that state agencies were not communicating effectively with the updates of the program. So that was the one at the end of the conversation. I remember it saying her response, the mother's response was, the state agencies need to get together and figure this out because the rules provided to the DHS there were out of date. And this family was in the middle of the lack of communication between departments. So here in Texas, we have the Texas Compassionate Use Program run by Department of Public Safety. And then we have our Health and Human Services Department helping with the research behind things. However, just to make sure that doesn't happen here in Texas, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think we can do better as advocates for our children to help them make sure that those communications aren't missed and things like this don't happen?
In regards to the story of the family in Oklahoma, I can only make presumptions because news outlets will put what they want in stories. So just based on experience, I can speculate that nobody knew what the law was, and the judge that signed the removal, because it wasn't just an agency that advocated for it, a judge had to sign it. The judge didn't know it either, and that's probably why it took 3 days. With complete presumptions here, probably why it only took 3 days to get the child back. In regards to if we have positive changes, whether it be in the past or in the future, CPS caseworkers are the ones that are doing, the work as far as investigating the family. And then obviously, if God forbid there would be a removal, then it goes up the chain. CPS caseworkers, no matter what we're talking about, are not attorneys. They don't know the law. And unfortunately, I have tried for 7 years to get them to know the law, and that's not working. So it's on you guys. You're going to have to learn your rights to your child, to yourself, and then have somebody that you trust to help you that knows your rights and your child's rights. That story in Oklahoma doesn't surprise me. It surprises me that it happened in a state that has some of the best laws as far as what I understand. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened here because there are so many judges that view cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, they view it as like the devil. And then you add the mental health narrative around it, and then the document that's put in front of that judge is like, oh, we have to remove this child, the child's in danger. So it's up to you guys to know the rights of yourself and your child and find somebody to help you in a CPS investigation. But based on what she said, just complete speculation. Nobody knew what was going on, and that's why they got the kid back in 3 days. But a kid leaving your care for 1 hour is traumatic. 3 days is insane. In Texas, the average is 18 months. 30% of children that get removed get returned. And of that 30%, if they get returned and put with aunt, grandmother, that's considered reunification. So the percentage that they're putting out there, which is 30%, is significantly lower than that. So whatever we're talking about in Texas, we're getting to the better spot for people that want to use marijuana for their children or for themselves, medical cannabis. But right now we're not there. And if your kiddo gets removed, you have a 30% chance of getting them returned. And of that 30%, kinship placement is considered reunification. So know your rights for your child and for yourself, and be your best advocate, even if you have somebody like myself or an attorney, because sometimes they don't know.
Yeah, so that kind of leads actually into the next question. So House Bill 567 was passed last session by James Brink, and which was a great addition. It helped protect caregivers to give marijuana to their patients that are listed under the Texas Compassionate Use Program. One thing I noticed is it does not include patients in the Texas Compassionate Use Program, just the caregivers to them. And so it's progress, right? We're very grateful for this bill. However, what are y'all's thoughts and concerns on this bill, and what work do we need to do to fix this bill for next session?
On House Bill 567, it was a large bill. There was a lot more than just the marijuana stuff for the families. But there was so much progress in that bill that the department had to find a loophole around the whole bill, not just the marijuana stuff. And let me reiterate, the marijuana stuff was basically like the use of marijuana, the addition of marijuana, or a positive drug test does not constitute child abuse. We went over that earlier. But also the language that was changed in there was that they can no longer remove a child based on substantial risk. It had to be immediate danger. Okay, when that bill went into effect in September, and then October, we had the advocacy policies that I was talking to you guys about. What I started seeing in every case, no matter if it was with myself or when I was working with an attorney or other advocates that I've trained over the years that are not attorneys. Remember the global investigation conversation? They used to want you to give them all these things, a HIPAA release, interview your child, look at your house, look at your food supply, and I could go on what they want. And it was my job, whether it be myself or with an attorney, to assess what's safe to say no on and what's safe to say yes on. My strategy has to evolve, because since that bill went into effect and since the advocacy policies went into effect, the removal rates are down. And in my opinion, because the removal rates are down, they are now creating an emergency. So let's say she was under investigation for CPS and I felt like it was safe based on my experience doing this, that it was safe for her to say, you may not come into my house. Well, now they're going straight to a court, and it's called an ex parte hearing. They have a hearing without you present. They present an affidavit and they say, this woman is not letting me into her home. Previous to House Bill 567 passing, there were ways to safely say no to certain things and ways to say yes to certain things, depending on everybody's circumstances. Since that bill has passed, every time you say no, they're getting a court order to aid investigation. And what I believe is happening is they are creating an emergency from the get-go. The next problem that needs to be addressed is when you are served with a court order to aid investigation, what that means is they're forcibly going to investigate your family. Depending on what the court order says, they're going to force you to let them in their house. They're going to force you to let them interview your children. Some of these counties that are doing this are using them as warrants, and they are not warrants. Everybody has the right to have a notice of hearing in their day in court. Some of these counties are not giving the families their day in court. So if I am working with an attorney, I am able to say things very carefully because I cannot practice law without a license. But when they show up to the house with this court order to aid investigation, because usually it's after hours on purpose or on the weekend or on a holiday when they expect the attorney not to be available. As you've already seen my phone right here, I'm available all the time. So I will get on the phone and I will say, before you come in, can you please read the order? They will read the order with anger because they're tired of the parent saying no, and now that somebody's advocating for their best interest, to say, well, wait a minute, we don't even know what you're asking. Can you please read the order? Sometimes when they read the order, it'll say, we have to interview the children alone. Sometimes it'll say, we have to interview the children. So what I will say is, ma'am, what you just read to me said that you wanted to interview the children just in general. Nothing says interview the children alone. Well, we want to interview the children. We want to interview the children alone. Well, that's great, but that's not what you just read to me. So I believe this order needs to be reviewed by the attorney. So you're gonna have to leave. You don't have a warrant. Please have your attorney contact the family's attorney during business hours. Let them see the kids on the inside of the threshold and then make them go away. That is extremely scary to parents. They have no attorney who's available, if they even have one, because they do this after hours. They have a court order that they're like, oh my gosh, are we violating the court order? Because they don't know the rules. But sometimes they're presenting a notice of hearing so that you can have your day in court, hire an attorney, and have the judge substantiate or not substantiate that order. But they are treating them like warrants, and they're denying families their due process rights. They are not warrants. So that needs to be changed, and that covers every allegation of child abuse and neglect. That was a long answer.
No, that's great. Thank you for all the input.
skip this one and go back to the one before, because I did realize, like, I know I told you I didn't want to say anything about that, but I did realize while we were, well, Chris was talking that, advocacy does a lot more, and I guess it's kind of overlapping both questions. Advocacy work at the Capitol does a lot more than just, talking to legislators about making changes. So it helps you to build relationships with all of these politicians and all of the other people in the field. So, you get to know a lot of attorneys and, you were there, I think, when somebody was testifying, and said something about this. Somebody said something, anyways, you were there, I'm sure. And he said, who's this now?
Oh,
we're
yes,
talking about-
the mamas.
Yeah, so what she's
Yep.
doing
So
as
it was a
Representative
legislator
Frank
that got involved.
is the head of the CPS in the
Yeah,
House.
so, it helps you get connections that can help you, and it also establishes credibility, I think, in, if something were to happen. Now, I mean, I have friends, one of my best friends has a good friend, who plays football with somebody with CPS, and we talk about this in a casual situation, so like, I'm doing this, what would happen? You know what I mean? So I think that, don't just throw your story out there. I felt comfortable talking about it with her, she was trusted, and I met her a lot of different times, and also sometimes you feel like I'm willing to take that risk in order to push this issue more, you know what I mean? But it definitely felt it. But sometimes I get a bull in a china shop. So,
Yeah.
but advocacy does get you a lot of connections. Like this one is a new connection for me. But it gets you a lot of connections that can help you work through these issues, and it also gets you a lot of knowledge through talking to other people, making those connections that can kind of help you figure out what to do if you're having health issues. Where physicians may not know your experience.
And if I could just add on to what both of them said, what you're talking about was in the 2019 session, when she was talking about her story, and Representative Frank stepped in and said, I am in charge of the CPS, and he took a personal interest in her case and helped her out. And he was the author, so the next session, he authored the bill 567. And like, she was saying, Krista was saying that, the CPS, I found this out in advocacy too, that once they make a law, not just about medical cannabis, but about anything, the law is this, but then they follow it up with about 500 pages of rules and regulations of how to implement it and what they're gonna do. And like she said, CPS finds a way to work around that to get what they want to do. And I think, overall, we need to find a way to have these state agencies, whether they're law enforcement or CPS or, the sheriff's department, the DPS, whoever, all these state agencies need to not only be aware of the law, but kind of be taught what was the intention of the law. And I think these lawmakers sometimes, pass the laws with the intention of doing something, and then the regulations come along and say, well, hey, how can we, get our enforcement.
So
without-
in regards to what she said, as far as like, what can we do to help things better? We need something to take care of the recent, I believe, retaliatory behavior on giving everybody a court order to aid investigation, some of those people without a day in court. We need that. He mentioned Representative Frank. Representative Frank is the chair of the House Committee for Health and Human Services, and Senator Colhorst is the Senate chair for Human Services. They call them two different things, and I get them mixed up. The head of CPS is Jamie Masters. She's considered the commissioner. But the chair of the House, James Frank, and the chair of the Senate committee, Senator Colhorst, if you guys experience something you have in the past or you're concerned about something, those are the two legislators you need to email. They are the ones that have direct access to Commissioner Masters. And she ultimately has a pretty decent amount of power as the commissioner, but those two individuals are the ones that have the ability to bring the bill to the committee and encourage their fellow legislators to pass it through or vote it out. There's lots of bad legislation too. So, but those are the things I personally think need to be done no matter what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And then I also think one more thing, that we need a cannabis board that has patients or caregivers on it. Just like we have a dental board or, a medical board that has, that has some consumer, it's not all consumers, but there's consumers that are represented as part of that body. And I don't feel that cannabis patients are represented in Texas at all right now,
Correct. That was the loophole in the wording of the law. So definitely very grateful for his support, however. So really, last question for y'all. So how do we deal with doctors that object to the parent's decision to using cannabis? Well, we understand that here we have a lot more doctors that are prescribing now because the program has expanded. I think we're up to, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're up to almost 555 doctors. My number may be off, but that's a lot more doctors than there were last legislative session. And so while that's great, there's still a lot of doctors out there and specific hospital organizations that refuse to even have that discussion and still treat it the old fashioned way. So what can we do to help them, when they object to the parent's decision for cannabis use, and how can we help educate our doctors more?
In regards to CPS, just know if you go to a physician who doesn't agree with that choice, they have the ability to call CPS on you. So as a parent who's been through a CPS investigation more times than I would like to admit, I don't ever want to experience that again. So if I was under a situation where I needed to have my child looked at for medical cannabis, I would seek out the doctor first and make sure that I could go to a safe place. In regards to if you go to a place and they're like, oh, we don't agree with that, don't argue with them. Okay, that sounds great. We're going to follow your medical advice and get out of there as quickly as possible. If you stand up for your rights in that situation, you are looking at a CPS phone. It's not right, but that's the way it is.
I would agree. I think that the thing is to be an educated consumer of medical providers, and that do your research and figure out who you think you want to go to based on maybe recommendations from other people, and kind of feel the doctor out. I think with questions about it, and if you're comfortable having a conversation with them about would this be appropriate for my child, it's pretty easy to find out. And if they're not, go someplace else. In my opinion, not enough parents are treated as part of the caregiver team for the child. If the doctor says this and this is what we do. But I've been lucky, even though many of these physicians have threatened CPS, and I say threatened kind of loosely because they've done it in a respectful way. It's been when, Kira's been, my son's doctor moves, and we get a new doctor, and then a new doctor moves, we get another doctor. It's like, going with a new doctor at Texas Children's is kind of a regular occurrence. But so you have to regularly go through that stress of, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with another doctor. And, I feel like it's the physician's right to call CPS also in those cases, because it's their judgment, and it's a difficult situation that they're in to not know if us doing that is putting the child in a greater harm than it is. I told her I was getting it from Colorado and making it at home. That sounds dangerous. It is dangerous, but is it more dangerous than letting him have 40 to 60 seizures a day? That's the thing. You've got to find somebody who's willing to have that conversation. Even though she threatened CPS, she still was willing to have that conversation with me, and we, with lawyers and stuff there, and say, well, I'd like you to do one of these three things, or you can just see somebody else. But if you're going to continue his care with me and you're going to continue what you're doing, then I'm not comfortable with it, and I'm going to call CPS. I think that's perfectly appropriate thing for her to have done. And we just chose to go to somebody else. That's it.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important for us to also recognize that the physician is part of that care team just as much as we are. And that, I wouldn't want somebody to compromise, that for.
Issues from a health insurance perspective
Yeah.
is CPS treated differently as the child becomes a teenager versus like a smaller child?
If the child has a prescription of any kind, as far as CPS goes, typically, and I say that for a reason, typically, because caseworkers do things based on their own judgment, okay? But if you have a doctor's order, a doctor's supervision over the cannabis, then you're fine. If you're self-medicating your child, there's ways around it, but, you know, it would be much better if you got a knock on the door and you had that prescription ready. Every caseworker is different. I can always tell if a caseworker smokes pot recreationally. I can always tell because they're like, I don't care. if they're, you know, of a culture where it's like, oh my gosh, that's, you know, that's horrible, then that they're going to treat you worse. So there's no way for me to tell you it's always like this, but in regards to your kiddo, if you can get something with doctor's approval, you're going to be safer no matter who comes knocking at the door.
And I want to jump in on this a little bit, just so y'all know, if you're looking for a doctor to have this discussion with, all of the registered physicians are listed on the DPS website. It's actually curt.dps.texas.gov. And you can
I don't
list,
think they're all listed.
they're not
Yeah.
all
No,
listed
they-
anymore.
No, they've been able to remove their name because a lot of them get calls from, you know, people who may not call, but you know, it's just too much. for
Yeah,
them to
like
handle.
our doctor, she, I don't think her name is on there anymore because it got to the point where like the waiting list was like more than a year.
Oh,
16
because the
months.
people who are on
Because
this
all the
list.
you know, because that, she was one of the first ones on it. And like I said, you know, you have a state of 30 million people
Mhm.
and you're talking about 100 doctors. It was just overwhelming for them at first.
Wow. So there's still some on here that you can use, but yeah, that's great advice. Like, just definitely ask the doctor.
Yes, I could chime in a little bit. I'm actually a physician that prescribes. I'm from San Antonio. And Krista, I actually came across, you know, she's a patient of mine for the registry. And she was kind of like you folks did. She was medicating her son, a 10-year-old with autism on the spectrum and a seizure disorder. And she said that you know, and it kind of happened where they came to me because from what you just said, there are other doctors, even the neurologists, weren't agreeing with the product or to be on that. But with that said, if you come across, now some of the patients that come to me ask me that particularly, it's like if I'm on the registry with your prescription, you know, I'm having a custody battle now with ex-wife or so-and-so, like how is this gonna hurt me, you know? And I don't know the answers to that, right? So sometimes maybe guiding my patients as to where you go if that becomes an issue. And you said some of that with the last question. My prescription is gonna help in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, your
If the child is
prescription.
being prescribed on it versus if they're prescribed and they're giving it to the children, right? That was the case she was. Now, she actually came in and the child is my patient also now.
Mhm.
And they're on the registry with me. But I think even as a physician, one of your questions, how do you educate physicians? That's hard. There wasn't much out there. And I came up, I'm one of the new 555, right? I've been following the legislators since 15, you know, who could prescribe then. Beginning had to be double boarded neurology, psychiatry, there weren't many. I'm a family practice doctor by trade. So every session that came in, I'm from San Antonio, military city, USA, PTSD, came across. And that's how they found me through the registry, right? But even once I got started, I did some of my due diligence by going to other states where there is even this recreation of speaking to docs, getting the game plan for diagnosis and ratios of what I'm going to talk to. But even at that, I realized some of my colleagues doing it in Texas or from my own residency program. Some of it's still a loss of information for physicians where to get it from. Luckily, you know, I've come across these journal clubs in the Northeast that are pretty in tune and seeing just the decrease of opioids and seeing the decrease of benzos. That's what's happening now, and it's very exciting for me as a physician. So, but I do field some of those questions like you guys did. You know, I'm at a loss. Where do I start?
Well, I
Especially
think a
for
good
children.
place to start is to connect, but have them connect with Heather. She'll be good for connecting with the right people. I know she's sent me.
In regards to you specifically, we ask doctors to do this on many of the topics, and some doctors are terrified to do it. So it's up to the physician to do it. But if you were willing to do it in any circumstance, whether it be CPS investigation, custody, whatever, if a doctor sends a general letter this is my patient.
Yeah, that's what we do, yeah.
She has been my patient since this date. I have never had any concerns for child abuse and neglect. I am legally obligated to call CPS if I have any concerns for child abuse and neglect. You don't talk about the marijuana, because I'm thinking about your license too. So you don't
Exactly.
talk about the marijuana. You don't have to say that you don't think they're child abusers. You don't have to put any statements in there that can cause you harm. But you can put general statements in there that just say, when they've been in front of me, I've never had any concern. Because that leaves you off the hook for whatever's happening.
On their legal side.
Yes. And
And
if
helps
they come into my practice and I suspect child abuse and neglect, I'm legally obligated to do that. I've had physicians be more than okay to sign that. In regards to anything specific related to the treatment, I don't care what treatment we're talking about. And I understand, they're like, no, good, I don't want to do that. I don't want to put that in writing somewhere, because it,
Sure.
it scares you guys. That's worked for CPS and it's worked for custody battles. The issue with custody battles is when you get in a custody issue over cancer treatment, marijuana, autism, vaccines, whatever, and you get a battle of dueling physicians.
Okay, yeah.
So then it's up to the judge to decide.
Depends on how they feel about
I
it.
cannot express to you parents enough, if you let a judge decide, and y'all don't try to work it out amongst yourself, like, it's the worst option. Like, do whatever you can to work it out amongst yourself, whatever that medical decision might be. Because ultimately it goes back to the judge, and a judge, because they're worried about their position, they're gonna go to the leading doctor, the leading whatever, and be like, okay, this is what this website says to do, this is how I'm ruling on it. Because at that point, all they care about is their seat. They don't care about your, I'm sure judges do, but in that position, that's what they're thinking.
So we have about 4 more minutes. So does anyone else have any questions for the panel? Yes.
This is quite a bit earlier, but you mentioned court orders and how they're not warrants, but have they ever levied penalties against you for not complying with the court order?
It depends on what the court order is. So on that particular court order, it's called a court order to aid in an investigation or a court order to aid to investigate. It's similar. And they are supposed to come with a notice of hearing. They serve you with the constable and you have your day in court. If it is being served to you, that particular one, you can choose to read it and do it right then and there if you want to. But if you want an attorney, you can say, I'm going to take this. Thank you so much. I'm going to get an attorney. The ability for a judge to place any type of punishment on you is going to be there no matter what you do. Judges have a lot more power than people realize. But in my experience, and especially if you have an attorney, then they're like, oh, well, the attorney's not present. The attorney can't interpret the court order. It's not a warrant. We're going to wait till Monday. So when I have families that I'm helping by myself, I typically am a little bit more cautious on telling them to go away because it could harm the family. But if it's a client and they're retained by one of the attorneys that I work for, I have no problem telling them to go away, and they don't get in trouble. But it's always a possibility. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering what the typical outlet for Child Protective Services to get involved is. Like, where is?
What constitutes a report?
Yeah, like, is it with the physicians or?
Oh, anyone can do it. I mean, even the neighbor who suspects there's an issue,
Oh, so
the
it's
kid
that-
at
I
school.
can just make a call right now and
Yeah.
say.
Yes.
Oh, what?
Yes. You can report hearsay.
That
Yeah.
is great. I didn't realize it was that liberal with.
Well, like even in school, like if you have a 9-year-old tell a 10-year-old that, hey, I know my mom smokes pot, then that other child's, it immediately gets reported. I mean, kids can talk. Sometimes it's half truth,
I
right?
helped a family, the accusations were they were
For what?
vegan.
That's the worst thing I've ever heard.
That's so sorry.
No, but why are they spending our tax dollars investigating that family? It should have
Well, I
not.
mean, even if you're in a business and your business is in the cannabis space.
And I'm-
Yes.
I have a friend that-
A child is a student, they let that out. The parents are now depending on the, well, look up.
My son says I sell cannabis.
Yeah. Call that-
No, I don't sell cannabis. I'm going to school to sell
And I mean, you're
cannabis.
talking about little kids, they don't know what they're saying.
Yeah,
They
Yeah,
have no idea the concept of, they just know drugs were bad. I've seen this picture here, oh, now it's on mom and dad's, computer. It's lost in translation. It doesn't-
Anybody can call that anything and there's no ramifications. The current statute in the state of Texas, the ability to sue a false reporter, there's no private cause of action. So like right now, I can stare at you long enough and talk to you long enough, I can figure out enough information about you, I can make a false report on you, whether or not you have children or not.
Yeah.
And they will investigate you to the fullest, depending on what lie I want to create. You could be dealing with a criminal investigation. You have to hire an attorney. I don't have to have any evidence to make a report. The quickest way to ruin somebody's life financially and otherwise is to call CPS on them. And we have no way to hold these people accountable for being able to do that.
All right.
And that's why it's so important to have someone, you know, that can be an advocate, because, you know, I know from experience, when you're talking, dealing about your own child, you know, everything's emotional. When you have someone who can step back and look at it, just think as a matter of fact, you know, the facts are, this is how we need to handle it. It makes it a lot easier, and it's a lot less stressful that you have someone like that can kind of, you know, shepherd you through the way, you know, of dealing with CPS. 'Cause even though we've never really had to, it's always been a fear of ours. You know, we were a little more proactive and kind of, but it took a long time for us to get that way. It's one of those things that every day was the stress of what's going to happen when the cops bust in here.
Well, and I appreciate,
Yeah, not anymore. Not anymore. I don't worry about it.
yeah. And
I just wanted to add on. Gary's part is found out what I was doing. They run their mouths so much.
Yeah, sometimes we have younger kids, you know, they can say anything, like you're saying, anything can get said at school.
Yeah.
And you don't know who's gonna hear it and how it's gonna be interpreted. And, you know, we were just fortunate that we never had any real serious issues.
well, I want to commend the two of you. For those who don't know, this is Stacy Fowler. This is Greg's daughter, who we were talking about earlier. And not just as he as a father, been an amazing advocate, but now she has helped put this policy conference together. So we give you a round of applause. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage to talk about these things. So I appreciate the panelists for speaking. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you.